Howdy folks, today we've got this beautiful Fender Bassman 50. Almost similar to the model that I recorded and put up on YouTube a few months ago. That one there is my personal one, which has now done probably at least 50 gigs and is working fine. However, this is a customer's one, and we're just going to go through and point out some of the things that have already been changed, some of the things that I'm going to change, and things I'm going to check over as well. So the first thing I noticed down here is because this is an export model just like mine, it comes with a multi-tap transformer that lets you switch to 117, 200, 210, 220, 230 and 240 volt. Amazing, right? Well, this was switched to the 230 setting, and not a big deal, but to get the voltages right in here, we really want it to be set to 240, so I flicked that over and I'll let the customer know to be careful with that. I haven't checked the fuse yet. I haven't even turned this on yet, but we're just going to go through the insides of the amp here and go through some of the components that are going to be changed. First and foremost are these two original Mallory caps right here. This is probably what's causing him his issue. Now, the customer complained that the amp went really fuzzy and lost all its volume. I'm going to suspect that the bias has probably gone crazy on this. And you know what? I could test it, but we're going to save the customer some money by replacing these caps anyway. These things have been in here for at least 30-40 years. For the sake of a few bucks, it's easier to just replace these bias caps, and then we know the bias circuit is running well. Now, the bias circuit has been modded. So this resistor here is probably original, as is this one, but this one here is brand new, and it's in line with, it's in series with that resistor. So we're going to look at that and see what's going on there. Going through the rest of the amp, I'm going to check over things. These blue things usually don't go crazy. They're pretty stable. I know that Terry from D Labs hates these, and that's cool. That's his opinion, but that's okay. Some of the resistors here have all been replaced, so we'll have a look at that. And let's go down further. This cap here is not original, so we'll look at that and make sure it's the right value. Okay. Let's go further down here. There's a replacement cap here, and there's a Mallory cap in here we're going to replace. That's probably one of those either a 0.1 or either a 0.1 or 25 microfarad or something. 25 microfarad, 25 volt. So we're going to replace that old Mallory cap as well, which is dirty and crusty. And what else we got in here? That's pretty much about it. There's this little L-Gen cap here. That's probably the one microfarad. Overall, it's a tidy unit. It just needs a little fixing up and a little love and care. Once I get those components replaced, especially this bias circuit, so I'm going to go ahead and order some parts for that right now. Once I get it up and running and healthy and sounding good again, then I will check the condition of the tubes. I'll rebalance as necessary. These look like they're old JJ 6L6GCs, and I'll check the 12AX7 / whatever valves are in here. Next thing we'll probably do is look at the filter caps in the dog box. I'm going to assume that, considering the bias caps haven't been changed, I'm going to be surprised if the filter caps had been changed. So let's check it out. Alright, flipping over to the other side, we look at the complement of JJ tubes here. These are all ECC83, so they're basically 12AX7s. And this one here in the phase inverter is a 12AT7. It's a Messer tube, so it's an ECC81. The other thing to quickly note is the JJs in here, they're very loose. They're extremely loose. So I'll get in there with some needle nose pliers or tweezers and see if I can bend the pins back, because that I'm barely That's how much pressure you'd be applying to a wet tissue, and the valves are moving around quite significantly. These jaws have been bent as well, so that one's not even making contact with the tube, and they should be nice and tight. So I'm going to pull those off and tighten them up as well, but we'll do that at the end of the video. Now, next thing I'm going to do right here is get this dog box off. We'll see what surprises lay inside, eh? That's on really tight. Stuck on there. So I'm going to assume these caps are probably the real original ones, because this dog box is stuck on here. It's not even coming off. I'm going to say that that's really stuck on there. Yep, they're originals. Hey, one new one. Why replace just one? So we're going to replace all the filter caps. That's what's happening next. I'm going to order some parts, and with the magic of editing, we'll have them in front of us like this. Alright, so the parts have arrived for this Fender Bassman, and it's time to change some capacitors. So I'm going to start with the filter capacitors here. I've just laid these ones on top, so I have them in a nice orientation. It's easy to get to, but I'm just going to put them to one side right now, and yeah, we'll change them over. So essentially, the 16 microfarad is going to be replaced with a 16 microfarad. The 20 microfarads here, 3 of those are going to be replaced with a 22 microfarad. And the 70 microfarads, well, the closest I could find these days by F&T are 100 microfarads. So that's what's getting replaced. Going up to 100 microfarad, you probably think, whoa, well that's a bit much, isn't it? Well, look, reality is it's not. And the reason for that is really simple. The reality is that if we take the 70 and the 70 and halve it, we get 35. If we get the 100 and the 100 and we halve it, we get 50. The thing is that this amp it's safe to do that because it's a solid state rectification, and there's no tube. There's not even a tube socket for going about it any other way. So we're pretty safe. So, next thing I'm going to do is rejuvenate the joints with new solder. Now I'll just do these bottom ones. I don't know if you can see this or not. So I'm just going to reflow. In fact, I'm going to clean my tip because it's been playing around with all that old solder. And you know, it doesn't have to be a thick glob. More isn't better. The idea is that we're just rejuvenating these joints. I'm just making them look nice and secure again. Okay, this one in particular, all the solder's probably flowed out of the bottom. So, you know, really, there ain't much left on the actual terminal. Alright, I'll do the top layer now. So this is up here. And then finally, we will cut the terminal strips off. So now, we just flip this over. And we get under here. And we clip off all the excess. We'll do the same up here. Alright, these are happy little joints. Let's make sure this is in place properly. So it's definitely not shorting out on anything. And then it's a matter of putting our screws back on. What we can do now is put the dog box back on here and we're pretty much done with this section of the amp. These capacitors are old, leaky, and just to give you an idea, you can see it's, you know, the goo is starting to jizz out here. Some of the other ones, you got little pimples and little sweat marks where things are coming out. This cap here, it's, you know, some of its delicious goo from the inside has come out. The other caps, this one's probably okay, but you're replacing one, you might as well replace the lot. It's got a little pimple there, but and this one, yeah, it's an Elner, but so what? You know, isn't it nice the next person that opens this can look at it and go, oh, they've replaced this with $100 worth of caps, and they're all the same brand, and they're all the correct rating, you know, and it's just nice. The next technician that opens this won't be cursing and swearing and calling me an asshole because it was done right. The next step you'll see is me flipping the amp over and replacing some of the caps on the other side. So let's do that right now. Alrighty, so the first thing I'm going to change while in here is these two caps right here. Now the caps in here, these bias caps that are in here, these are 80 microfarad 75 volt. You pretty much, well, I pretty much can't find these anywhere in Australia, but I change them to 100 microfarad 100 volt, and again F&Ts. Here is a huge little trap. They're providing our negative bias to our tubes. Okay, let's get rid of them, and we'll deal with that joint later. And then right now, I'm just gonna get these bits off. So I'm gonna cut the capacitor. Okay. So remember, the positive side goes here. Now what I'm gonna do is take little needle nose pliers and I'm gonna make a little J hook. Alright, and the new capacitor. Oh. There's our bias wire just popped out of a bad solder joint. So we'll probably fix that right now while we're in here. Now, like I said, what I've done, I've created a little J hook And I'm going to do the same for this one, this capacitor. And that way it's making a nice mechanical connection. And we can snip all the excess off later when we're done. Okay, so let's get this one in now. And that way it's nice and secured in place. Alright, and we can snip the end off that while we're here. Okay, so that's not going anywhere. And then the other side, I'm going to kind of estimate a good point to cut it. And I'd rather have excess than get stuck with not enough terminal lead from the capacitor. So I could probably afford to cut off a bit more, but that's all right. Okay, that's a good secure link. There's plenty of solder there. I'm going to reflow this joint as well. Just make sure that is secure. I'm not happy with that joint. I'm going to reflow this one again. The bias feed coming off the transformer looks a little bit sus to me. That's a lot better than before. All right. So really all we have left to change is this capacitor here. And I'm going to make use of that little lead there. And then this other side, I'm going to show you what I have to use. So let's put this insulation on here. This will also give us a good indication of how much lead we need. I'm going to go about that much. So that's going to be good. That'll flow in nicely under there. And we'll do that now. It's done. And now the fun part. So let me show you how I do this. This is how that gets done. This giant soldering iron. There's enough thermal mass in this to melt the icebergs in Antarctica. It's a little bit excessive, but she is going to get the job done. So, I'm going to let this warm up. Takes a good 20 minutes. In the meantime, let's pause and come back. Alright, so the soldering iron here is finally coming up to temperature. That probably took about 10-15 minutes for this to happen. I just did some other stuff while I was waiting. You can see the size of this thing. It's probably about 40-50 centimeters long. It weighs about 10 kilos, so it's quite unwieldy. But it makes really short work of these big ground plane solder blobs. The little soldering iron, you can see the scale of this thing. This is my normal handheld soldering iron. And this is pretty much just the tip. Okay, big bastard. I'm actually laughing because I hope Terry from D-Labs is watching, because he shows us his big Unger soldering iron. And I don't want to one-up you because you're absolutely freaking knowledgeable and amazing, but look at the size of this thing. I'm just going to put it on the ground plane here and let it do its job and make super easy work. That was easy. And then we're just going to go right ahead and put this one down in its place. So let that soak in, and I'm just going to push down on this lead so the pressure keeps it in place. Okay, and watch that solder slowly set, and that's done. So you can see how quick and nice and easy that was, and you can see how impossible the puny soldering iron was. You'll see this again in another video coming up, because I'm going to be replacing some components in my personal Fender Bassman that I recorded and put up on video a few months ago. And I'm going to need this to do that. So, bear with me for a moment as I'm going to take this outside and leave it on the concrete, because that's the safest place for it to be to cool down. This 25 microfarad cap, which is hidden away under all these cables, we're going to undo the lead from this side and that side and pull it through, and then we're going to replace it with a Mallory 25 microfarad cap. So I'll start with the one that's hard to do. This one's really easy to access, so we'll start with the hard one. And a nice easy way to get to this is like so. Hold a set of pliers or needle nose on the lead instead of holding it with your fingers, because the joint's going to get hot, and then you're going to burn your fingers. It's pulled straight through amazingly, and we'll do the same thing over here on this side. So basically I'm just going to grab the lead. I'm careful with bending components. I don't want to break anything. I don't want to repair more than necessary. There's a lot of solder in this spot. Anyway, that 25 microfarads out, and we have to note the orientation here. This is the positive side, this is the negative side. So I'm going to leave that just here so I can remember that. Clean my solder tip and get my Mallory that's going to go in. And we're going to replace this. Okay, so let's put our tip back. Now what I'm going to do is have it so, again, it's facing upwards, so you can see the values. And, okay, let's say about there. So I'm going to snip the now what you can also do, is if you don't know how long to cut a lead for, you can cut a lead the same length as the component you took out. So in this case, this will be about here. Okay, I just did that off camera because I didn't want the lead falling into the chassis somewhere. Okay, so this side is okay and the leads are equal, and then this side I'm going to do it about here. Okay, and then that is the correct length that this capacitor should have. So let's feed it through. I'm going to grab the lead with my pliers here. Okay, and then we are going to solder this back in place. So we heat up the joint yet again. And looks like, as usual, we're going to have to reflow some more solder, but that's okay. There's no surprise there. And now what I'm doing is I've just bent that lead into position. There's plenty of solder on this side. Now I apologize, I'm going to have to stand up and get into, oops, sorry, I bumped the camera then. I have to get in position correctly for this because it's very tight in here and there's a lot of wires hanging around. I want to make sure that this goes in correctly. We have a good mechanical connection. So I apologize for getting in the way right now, but
There's a lot going on right here. Okay. Now that wire moved a little bit when I was playing around in here, so I'm just going to push that back in as well. In fact, that wire completely came out, so I'm glad I checked that. So what happened was, while I was heating that joint up and pushing the lead in for this capacitor, what happened was this wire, this black wire here, popped out of its location. Okay, so now just to secure this joint a little bit here, since some of that solder flowed out, just going to reflow that, and that's done. Okay, that's probably the hardest accessible capacitor right there, but hey, we got it in the end. Okay, last but not least, and then this will conclude this part of the job. Then we have to turn the amp on, bring it up slowly, and then let it warm up and check the bias. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much almost the full recap of a Fender Bassman 50. Next thing we're going to do is put the valves back in, get a speaker load connected to this, turn the amp on, let it warm up, rebias the amp once it's warmed up. So I'm going to turn it on and watch it for a few minutes. You know, you want to watch for the smoke escaping and things like that. That's pretty much how you recap a Fender Bassman 50.
Alright, so I've gone handheld here. I've got the amp set up on its side here. This is a nice way to quickly look at things and also check the bias and things like that. So I'm going to flip the amp on right now. I've got it plugged into a 100 watt 4 ohm dummy load. I've also got it plugged into my scope, ready to check the sine wave that comes out of it and the quality of it. So I'm going to flick the amp on right now and see what happens. No indicator light. Alright, let's turn the amp off. Of course, blown fuse. So let's replace that and move on. So one of the things that's always good to check when you're working on an amplifier is your focus. Secondly, to check the rating of the fuse. I don't know if you can read this, but it says A6G, which is the size, and then it says 3 amp, 250 volt. Well, let's go look at the back of the amp and see what it says. Can you read that? It says 2 amp, doesn't it? Okay. Alright, and here we have the correct fuse. It's not only a 2 amp, but it's a slow blow, which is what the amp is asking for. So 2 amp slow blow fuse. Okay, so we're going to pop this in and we'll get the amp working again. Alright, so I thought I'd replace the fuse, which I have done, and I turned the amp back on and still no light. I've connected my ground to the bias tap here, and I should expect some sort of voltage here, except there's nothing going on there at all. And anyway, one of the things that happened when I got this amp, I noticed the voltage tap on the back here that's international. So we have 240 volt, 230 volt, 220 volt, 210, 200 and 117. It was set to 230. Now that extra 10 volts
ain't a big deal. But on the primary side, it's not a big deal. On the secondary side, it can increase our voltage. 20, 30, 40 volts, who knows? Anyway, now I know why it was set to 230 volts, because the 240 volt winding does not work. So here it is on the 240 volt winding. Flick the amp on, no indicator. I'm going to flick the amp off again. I'm going to change this to the 230 volt winding. I'm going to flick the amp on again. Indicator light turns on. And if I measure my voltage, getting minus 53, minus 54 volts there on the bias circuit. So I'm just going to sit here and watch the amp now that I've got it up and running. So I guess the thing is with this amp is that because it's running on the 230 volt tap, the voltages in here are going to be severely increased. And like I said, I know it doesn't sound like much, an extra 10 volts on the primary. But that extra 10 volts on the primary is quite a fair bit on the secondaries. So we are going to let this amp warm up. I'm just checking the negative bias to make sure it's still all happening. I'm glad I replaced those old capacitors with the new ones in the bias circuit. I'm just watching the tubes. They're all glowing. You can see here. I've got the light on, so it's hard to tell, but they are glowing. The main thing I'm looking for right now on the initial power up is that there is no smoke. And what we can see right now is that there is no smoke, which is good. Now the next step from here is going to be flicking the amp off standby into the playing position as if it's ready to play, and then we'll see how we go from there. Alright, so stay tuned. I've got my multimeter set to DC volts. I've got my ground wire connected to the ground of our chassis there, and what I'm going to do right now is flick the amp off standby into the playing position. I'm going to do that right now, and I've got the voltage supply here, 466 volts. Okay, this is the other side of the switch here, which is reading nothing pretty much. Okay, so that's that point right there. So this is our supply. You can see that, 466. And that goes to the switch, and then the switch comes back and goes here. So right now we're getting nothing. So fingers crossed, no smoke. Flick the amp on. Let's get our multimeter on there, and we should be getting about the same voltage, which is right, 456. Look, right now the amp is sitting happily. I'm going to turn it off standby, or on to standby again. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is set up my signal generator and get a 1 kilohertz sine wave into this so we can check it out on the scope. And yeah, then I'm going to show you how to measure the bias. Alright, so the next thing I've done here is I've just set up my 1000 hertz sine wave. I've got the lead plugged in to the amp, and I'm just going to show you something. As I was hooking all this up, I found... Okay, so we've got ourselves a sine wave, but look at it. Look at it. That's really, really distorted. Look at that. Looks good there with low volume, but then look at that. It's really distorted. Now I know this amp has been modified to work with guitar, but that would sound hideous. That's on volume 1 or 2, and it's already So 0, 1, 2. That's all red. Look at the jagged little... So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to turn the volume up slightly, and I'm just going to tap on each of the tubes. Okay, so let's see if we can... Alright, so no major microphonics there. Let's turn the volume up slightly. Okay, no major issues there at all, so that's fine. So I'm going to call it quits for tonight on this amplifier, but I just wanted to show a couple of things that have popped up on here while I was measuring the bias of this amp, and wondering why that distortion was coming out on the output. That was so horrible. So what I'm doing is measuring the resistance between the blue wire coming out of the primary of the output transformer and the red wire, which is the center tap, and I get 48.8 volts. And then the brown wire to the center tap, I get 46.2. So this transformer is very balanced. I've seen worse. I've seen 70 and 60 ohm. I've seen 60 and 40 ohm. And underneath that, I've got plate voltage on both tubes at the blue wire and at the brown wire. And they're both 455 volts plate voltage. So that's on the primaries. So what you do is 0.7, which is 70% of the maximum plate dissipation of 6L6s, which is what's in this amp, is 30, equals 21 watts. So 30 watts is the maximum, 70% is 21. You divide that by 455, the plate voltage, and you get 46 milliamps plate dissipation. Okay, that's the math. So you go down here, and I've done this for the blue wire and the brown wire. I do 0.0462, because it's milliamps, times 48.8, which is the ohms. And the voltage drop I get is 2.25 on the blue wire. And the brown wire, I get 2.13 volts voltage drop. So, well, that's the calculations, but the actual voltage drop I get when I measure things is 0.68. Interesting. So I'm wondering if, looking at the amp here, and I'm looking at this bias circuit, okay, and I'm going to look at the schematic. But, let me grab my chopstick here. This resistor here is a bit suspicious to me. It's new, and it's jumpered onto this one and then goes to ground. I wonder why that is there. Okay. Secondly, in here, it's harder to see. There's this resistor here going straight to ground. And then we have our bias resistor down in here in our bias circuit. So I'm kind of left wondering why there's so many resistors in the way. Now, it's close to 11 o'clock. I'm done for the night. I'm going to go to bed. And I'm going to deal with this tomorrow night or on Friday with fresh eyes. The customer's not picking this up until later anyway. But I have suspicions that this resistor sitting up here, it does not belong. And it's probably a high value. And it's probably wreaking havoc with the bias. So anyway, we're going to deal with that tomorrow. And hopefully clean up the output signal of this amplifier. Alrighty, so it's a new day, new daytime this time, so it's easier to see the amp. I had changed all the filter caps, changed the bias caps here, the negative bias, so the cap down here that you can barely see, and this one up here as well. What I've also done, and I did this off camera, there was an extra 5 ohm resistor attached to this 3.3k. Sorry, not 3.3k. 15k resistor here, and then there was an additional 5 ohm resistor. Weird. So I got rid of that. And I've just put the 15k ohm one there, and I have measured that. It is fine. However, the ones I've also measured are these resistors here. They're nice and black. They're supposed to be brown. You can see the difference in color compared to that bias resistor. Look at the color. So that's brown. These are black. They're the ones that that go on top of the 6v6. Oops, sorry, 6v6 power tubes, 6L6 power tubes. Oh man. So they're the 470 ohm resistors. Let's focus in on that. Okay, so I saw the color of them and thought to myself, well, they're probably out of spec. One, because that's what happens to these resistors anyway. And two, let's take them out because they look a bit black and crispy. So when I measure the ohms, the resistance, see if I can do this single-handed. Almost. Here we go. 820 ohms. So that's 0.8 kilo ohms. So it's nearly it's doubled in value. And then the other one is at 1.07 kilo ohms. So it's a kilo ohm resistor. They're supposed to be 470 ohm resistors. So I just believe that it's best to use the default values. So that's what I'm sticking to. One thing I did notice, now it hasn't cleaned the amp's output up at all, and I'm going to show you what's going on there in a second. But when I turn the volume up, when I turn the amp on and turn the volume up, now I'm still getting these horrible peaks. Okay, and it gets worse as I turn the volume up all the way. Okay, they're not even when it's clean, it's not right. You can see this peak is very pointy and this one's got a nice curve to it. So the sine wave coming out is not nice, is not pleasant at all. Now, I spoke to the customer, and the customer said to me, no, amp was playing clean, it was nice and loud. What I did was a little bit of signal tracing. So what I've done, I've taken my scope and I've put it on pin 6 of V1. Pin 6 of V1 is essentially the plate that goes to V2. Okay, and I'll put it on pin 1 in a second as well, but I'm just going to show you a nice clean output. Okay, let's you can see how much volume just came out of that. I'm going to turn the gain right down. Actually, let's change that completely again. Okay. So, this is the volume on the bass channel, cranked all the way up, and that's the output of V1. Now I've got my probe up there at the top on pin 1. Alright, so let's flick the amp back on. And I'm going to go back down here. Now you can see I've got a sine wave coming through. So pin 1 is the first stage of output I should be getting. That goes, it's the first half of V1, and the output goes then through the tone stack, which if we look up here, so basically signal goes in, comes in, goes to pin 1, sorry, goes to pin 2, which is your grid, comes out of pin 1, okay, and then that's where things get split. Some of the signal goes from pin 1 down to
pin 1 of V2, and I'll explain what's happening there. So if we look at the schematic, I've got it sitting over here. Alright, we can't see because it's not in focus. We can see signal comes in pin 2 in here, comes out of V1, goes through the tone stack to ground. So out of the tone stack you got your bass and treble and volume, and then it goes to pin 7 of V2, or V1B, sorry. Okay, so we're going to check the signal there, and we're going to check the signal on, we've already looked at the signal on pin 6, it's working. So I'm doing this is futile, but I'm also doing it just to show you how to signal trace this. Okay, so coming back here, let's get off pin 1 now, because we've looked at that. We're going to go to pin 7. Okay, so pin 7 should be getting the signal from the volume. It's getting very little signal. Okay, you can hear that coming through the resistor. And you saw how amplified that got before coming off pin 6. So, let me hook my probe up to chassis again, and we're going to go to pin 6 of V2. No signal. Okay, that would make sense because V2 should be our normal channel. So let's say I unplug. So I've unplugged from here, I'm plugging into there. So now we should get, well, hang on, my volume's all the way down and I'm getting a signal. And it's not changing. This amp is a shambles, it's a mess. Okay, so pin 6 is getting volume, it's getting a signal on V2, but none of it is actually adjusting or making any difference to my signal changes with the volume dial. So that's not working either. Okay, here we go, we're getting something through the master volume, but very, very little. Okay, oh, here we go. All right, we're getting something. Hey, floating around there. We're still getting a nice clean signal though. All right, we found the signal. Hooray! We're still getting a nice clean signal. Okay. So V3 is still getting a clean signal. That's good. Now, what we can do is check if that signal is still clean coming into the phase inverter, because that's the next step. And the inputs coming into the phase inverter are pin 2 and pin 7. Okay, and that's you make sure that is correct. Just going to come over here and look at my schematic again. And we have inputs on pin 2 of the plate and pin 7 of the plate. Here's our cathode bias. And here's our, sorry, not plate, grid. Pin 2 and pin 7 are grid, my mistake. And pin 1 and pin 6 are the plates that are feeding our 6L6s. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we are going to put our probe on pin 2 and pin 7, not simultaneously obviously, and see what happens.
Now, it got really dark in here all of a sudden because there's a thunderstorm coming, which means I'm going to turn things off soon and go and do something else and think about this amp. Alright, now I'm just going to come down here to the scope again. Let's turn the volume up. Alright, hang on, well, we're getting a bit of overdrive, but not anything horrible. Let me just turn the gain down on the scope. Alright, that seems good. That seems a lot nicer. That seems a lot nicer than what it used to be. That's a nice clipping sine wave. It's clipping a bit early, but it's clean. Okay, so that's on pin 2. Alright, therefore that's the signal coming into the phase inverter. Let's look at pin 1, where it's leaving the phase inverter. Okay, so back down here. Now I'm just going to change the magnitude on this because that is amplifying. Okay, so that's not a bad sine wave either. Okay. Alright, so we've looked at pin 1 and pin 2. Now we have to look at pin 6 and pin 7. Pin 7 is the signal coming in on the other side of the phase inverter. Okay. So let's have a look here. I might have to bump this back up. Okay, well, we can see this is a completely different story on this side, isn't it? Okay, look how square that gets. It's floating around a fair bit too. So that's the input coming in, pin 7. It's already very different to what was coming in on pin 2. I'll go back to pin 2 and do the same thing. I haven't touched the scope, all I've done is change. Look at that. Look at that beautiful, highly amplified sine wave. Back on the pin 7. Look at that. Look at that horrible signal. So we've come into pin 2, sine wave looks great. Pin 1, sine wave looks great with a little bit of clipping as you would expect. It's amplified. Pin 7, however, and all we have is our signal is coming here and it's going this way and this way. So something appears to be wrong around here. Now it could be anything from a bad tube. I'm going to change the tube and we're going to try it. In fact, I'll turn the amp off right now and let those tubes cool down. It could be one of these resistors here, so 330k, 330k. It could be this 0.1 200 volt capacitor. So we're going to look at all of those, okay, and see what it could be. So pin 2, let's follow that. It comes to here. It goes to this resistor and this capacitor. Pin 7 goes to this resistor here. Now these resistors have been changed. And I'm going to say, because they're all going to the same spot, those two resistors are supposed to be the 330k. Let's see if they are. Because to me it looks like they are brown, black, green, gold. And brown, black, green, gold resistors are 1 mega ohm resistors. Brown is 1, black is 0, green is 100 times multiplier, it should be 330k. Let's look at the resistors that are sort of around it as well. Okay, so pin 3 and pin 8 are joined together and come to the cathode resistor, which should be 470k. And in fact, it does look like a 470k. I'm familiar with that color. It's yellow, purple or violet, brown, and silver. So this resistor in the middle is fine. I'll get my chopstick to do this because I haven't discharged the caps. This little brown resistor in the middle is fine. Okay, these two are the incorrect value. And I don't know if that's part of the mods, but regardless, I'm going to change those. I don't care what the mods are anymore. I want to get this amp working properly. And then finally coming off this joint, this should be, I believe, a 22k resistor. And so this cap either should be a 0.1. Let's see if we can find the values on this. Okay, so that capacitor there that we've talked about is a 470J. This disc capacitor right here. There you go. I'm just shining the torch on there so you can see it. 470J. So it's a 47 picofarad, I think, if that serves me right, if my memory serves me right. So that's coming off. The 470J is coming off pin 2, and that's also incorrect. Oh, here comes the rain. From pin 2, we've got, yeah, it's supposed to be 330k. That's supposed to be a 0.01. Supposed to be a 0.01. A bit like this one up here. That's a 0.01. It says it, 0.01. This, wrong capacitor. So, that's the wrong capacitor. And I've just spotted a little tiny resistor in here. That shouldn't be here at all. That's just, it's a little half watt, quarter watt. So pin 7's right, it's got this big blue cap here. That's correct. Pin 2, incorrect. Pin 2, that cap should be a 0.01, and it's not. Alright, so I'm going to have to order more parts, unfortunately, because I'm not carrying one of those caps around with me. I'll have a look and see what I do have, but I don't believe I have one of those in stock. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to change these 1 mega ohm resistors back to 330k. The 470 ohm resistor in between them we're going to keep. That's fine. So what we're going to do here is replace these two 1 mega ohm resistors with the proper 330k ohm resistor. We're going to keep this 470 ohm resistor in the middle here. We're going to check out why this cap is sitting here and it shouldn't be. I'm going to double check that with a board layout as well as the schematic. And I think, what did we do? We didn't check that 22k. Let me just, no, that's definitely a 22k. That's fine. Yeah, this 22k hiding under here behind this cap. So this cap's right. Now I'm going to pull this cap and just check it, because this is the side of the circuit that's causing us issues. This is the side of the circuit that's giving us the distortion and that ugly square wave. So we're just going to do that and hopefully get to the bottom of it. So here's the Fender Bassman 50 complete and working. I've got it switched on right now, just doing a bit of a soak test. It is plugged into a 4x10 guitar cabinet, not a bass cabinet.
and it's a 8 ohm cabinet, not a 4 ohm cabinet. So, you know, things are running quite cool right now. But this is the box of parts that have been changed. Now, there's a whole bunch of filter caps in there. There's a couple of capacitors from the inside, which we did in the video earlier. There's a bunch of resistors in there too. And look, I didn't bother recording the resistors, or the resistor change, because I had about 3 other amps come in that had emergency repairs, and I got sidetracked. But anyway, what I'm going to do right now is try to see if I can put this camera in a position where you might be able to have a listen to what's going on. Let me see if I can do this. Alright, so here's a demo of the Fender Bassman. I'm playing bass through it. Anyway, so that's bass going through it. It's fixed. Thanks for watching. Probably one of the hardest jobs I've done, purely because the circuit was not standard. It had been modified, and not only modified, but severely compromised. So look, thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this extremely long video. I initially started off saying I'm not going to edit this video because I thought, you know, it's going to be an hour long at most. The troubleshooting side of it was an hour long at the most. Thanks for watching.